She was 6 years old, stepping into a war zone she didn't understand. It was a short walk, only 5 blocks to school. But on this morning, those 5 blocks felt like a battlefield. A 6-year-old girl, flanked by 4 federal marshals, made her way down the cracked pavement as a mob howled around her. Men and women, their faces contorted with rage, hurled insults that a child shouldn't have to hear. Then there was the coffin, a miniature box held high above the crowd, with a black doll inside, a grotesque warning, a death threat against a first grader. But she kept walking. Her name was Ruby Bridges, and this was the day a little girl became a revolutionary. In 1954, the Supreme Court ruled in Brown v. Board of Education that racial segregation in public schools was unconstitutional. But in New Orleans, like much of the South, white leaders refused to comply. 6 years passed, and nothing changed, until a federal court forced the city's hand. Out of hundreds of black children who applied to integrate all white schools, 6 were chosen. Ruby was one of them. She had no idea what it meant. Her parents told her only the basics. She would be going to a new school, that some people wouldn't like it, but she should stay focused and behave for her teacher. But Ruby was only 6. She still played with dolls. She didn't know or understand that her very presence that day would begin a new chapter in America's history. Early morning on November 14, 1960, the U.S. Marshals arrived at her door. The federal protection had been ordered by President Eisenhower to ensure her safety amidst the intense resistance and ongoing threats from segregationists. But Ruby wasn't scared. She saw the crowd, the signs, the screaming faces, and in her childish innocence, thought maybe it was a parade. Maybe they were celebrating something. No one had told her the truth. Inside the school, the silence was even louder. The hallways were empty. The classrooms were vacant. Nearly every white parent had pulled their child from school in protest. The teachers refused to teach, except one, Barbara Henry, a young woman from Boston, who saw not a symbol, not a controversy, but simply a child in need of an education. And so for an entire year, Ruby sat in a classroom alone. She wasn't allowed to see the other students. She wasn't allowed to go outside. There was no recess for her. Her lunch, lovingly packed by her mother, often sat untouched because her parents had warned her not to eat the school food. They feared someone might poison it. She wouldn't drink from the water fountains. She wouldn't take a single risk. But as the days stretched into weeks, the pieces started falling into place. The empty hallways, the hateful faces, the way people clenched their fists when they looked at her. One afternoon, she saw a woman in the crowd holding up a black doll in a coffin, and something inside her shifted. This wasn't a parade. This wasn't about school. These people weren't just angry, they were angry at her. And for the first time, Ruby began to understand. She was alone in that classroom because the world outside wanted her to fail. But she didn't. She refused to. Even with the weight of history pressing down on her tiny shoulders, she still showed up every morning. Outside, the protests continued. They didn't stop after a day or a week or a month. Grown adults spent their mornings screaming at a 6-year-old, threatening her life. Others threatened her families. And yet, every morning, Ruby returned, walking those same 5 blocks, escorted by the same men assigned to keep her alive. And in that classroom with Mrs. Henry by her side, she listened. She learned. She smiled when she could. The hatred that surrounded her was loud, but Ruby's resilience was louder by simply refusing to be broken. Ruby Bridges didn't march. She didn't give speeches. She didn't fight violent wars or lead armies into revolution. But she didn't have to. Her very desire to learn made her a hero. Her presence made her an inspiration, and her fearlessness made her a child revolutionary. And while it's easy to remember the people who shouted, the ones who threw things, the ones who carried coffins and screamed slurs. History doesn't belong to them. It belongs to a little girl who walked through their hatred and refused to stop. Ruby Bridges grew up to become a lifelong activist for equality and education. She has dedicated her life to advocating for children, founding the Ruby Bridges Foundation to promote tolerance and unity in schools. Her story became a testament to courage, taught in classrooms across the country. Decades after she first walked through those school doors, she continues to fight for a world where no child would have to face what she did. Her legacy endures, proving that even the smallest footsteps can shake the ground beneath them. If you found this story as powerful as I did, please make sure to hit that like button and drop a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. And if you're into stories like this, make sure you subscribe for more. As always, thanks for watching, and I hope you learned some.